Surviving the Survivor.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome back to another phenomenal episode. We are sad to report we are now past 1 month with these Idaho student murders, and there is no suspect who has been named or suspects, and no murder weapon to be found. But what we did find are two of the very best guests in the business, both with a background in television. Leading off the lineup tonight, Christopher Anderson. You call him Detective Sergeant Christopher Anderson. He's a retired Birmingham Police Department veteran with 27 years of experience in law enforcement. He has co-hosted the investigation Discovery Channel's television series Reasonable Doubt for the past 6 years. Previously, you definitely saw him, because I did, on A&E's First 48 Birmingham. That show is amazing. Cannot believe how long it's been running for and continues to run for. In addition to proficiently handling robbery, burglary, narcotics investigations, Detective Sergeant Anderson has solved over 92% of his murder cases with a 100% conviction rate. He's also host of the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast. And Chris, you have a new book coming out?
I do have a new book coming out. It highlights some of my how I transcended into the investigative world and made my way into homicide. And I focused on one of the cases that just changed my life, really. It made me a better husband, a better father, and a better investigator. And that all came down from one case that I just couldn't get out of my mind.
And what's the name of the book?
The book is called The Case.
The Case. Awesome. I'm looking forward to reading it. And then the man you see below him with that FBI, the sweet FBI shirt that I want sent to me, is Special Agent Bobby Chacon. He's a retired FBI agent. Before that, he was an attorney. He's also a writer for the Writers Guild Association. He advises television shows and movies on FBI-related issues and worked on a tiny little show that you may have heard of called Criminal Minds. So welcome, one and all. I appreciate this. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today, gentlemen, is our 100th episode. So congratulations to her, to Carmela, who's my host, but she is retired. She's only doing one of these or two of these a week right now. She's 83. We have to cut her some slack, but we've always got cardboard cutout Carm. If you want to support us on Patreon, and we need the help, you just go to Patreon and you check out Surviving the Survivor. You'll get behind the scenes footage, ad-free content, and our first live meet and greet with Carmela is set for Thursday, January 5th at 8 p.m. I like to start the show because these become whodunits, and we kind of forget the victims a lot of times, but I like to start with the victims' names. So let us never forget these young lives lost way too soon. We've got Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, 20, also, who were all brutally murdered just over 1 month ago. So without further ado, the police, they didn't hold a news conference today, but they put out a video, if you will, a video press release. They posted it to YouTube and other places on the internet. And one of the things that came out of it is that they say that they are seeking more information on the people in that 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra, which we heard about last week, which was near the scene of the crime when it happened. So Detective Sergeant, to you first, what do you make of this? People have a tendency to dissect all, the new tidbits of information. Police are still on the hunt for this vehicle.
You could, some of the internet sleuth will dissect this a million different ways in a case like this. You can never tell until law enforcement says that this person is either a person of interest or a suspect in this case. So I wouldn't draw too much from that information. But I would be vigilant, just like you said, during the press conference or during this video, be vigilant in looking for that vehicle, because it could be important. It could be that one piece of evidence that they need in order to close this case.
And Bobby, does it surprise you that at this point, there's been a lot of criticism about the word targeting and how the police handled it? So first question, does it surprise you at all that they're not holding in-person briefings and they're just posting these to the internet at this point?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. You know, and I would be in favor of not having any information coming out of my investigations. There were only two overriding factors that I would want any information leaving my investigation to go public, and that is if it is a genuine public safety concern to keep the public safe, and you have to release that information for that purpose, or if it serves a strategic benefit to the investigation. In other words, you release the information causing your suspect to do something, right? So that's a strategic type of benefit. Those are the only two situations I ever favored information being released. We, you know, not to sound callous, but I didn't work for the public. I didn't work for the families. I worked for the DA. I worked for the U.S. attorney, and my only objective was to catch the perpetrator in a way that could guarantee a conviction or a guilty plea. And that's, if I pursued that objective, single-handedly pursued that objective, then I would get the justice that the families deserved, and I would get the public's release of fear and things like that. So it doesn't surprise me that there can do, and I would favor actually less information than more. I know that upsets a lot of people in our 24-hour news cycle and insatiable hunger on the public's part for information, but unless it benefits the investigation, I wouldn't release it. Or again, the other thing is if it really relates to public safety, then of course it has to be released.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've transitioned from, sort of what they call traditional media to this new media. And it's amazing because the interaction is so much greater with commenters. And you start to see in the minds of some of these people on YouTube and Twitter. And people really do try to solve these cases without the knowledge that investigators have. And I always like to say, you don't know what you don't know. And we all don't know a lot since we're not the investigators. What we do know is what they brought up in this virtual, basically a press release. I keep wanting to call it a press conference, but it was essentially a press release. And the Idaho police captain, Roger Lanier, detective sergeant, said that they, quote unquote, may not realize they have information that could help the investigation, meaning the occupants of that 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. What do you read into that? They may not realize that they have information that investigators need.
Most of the public.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Most of the public, they don't realize how pivotal some information is. You could have, like the case that I speak about in my book, for instance, that was a case that I had absolutely nothing on. I mean, nothing. It was a whodunit from HE double hockey sticks. And but there was one witness who saw just this one thing, who decided months after we had been publicizing the investigation, publicizing the murder, and releasing some of the information that we don't like to release in criminal investigations. And he said that, okay, I saw this one thing, and that one thing was so pivotal to my case that I probably would have never closed it without it. So that's the reason why they are seeking information. Or then again, and I hate to release this. I don't want to, say anything that I don't know for sure. It could be nothing, or it could be everything. But in a case like this, where they're looking for a specific vehicle, you never know what that vehicle is involved in. This may be your suspect. This may be, or it may be just a person that saw something that they want to get information from. Either way, that information, that vehicle, whoever its occupants is, they need to be vetted by law enforcement as soon as possible.
Bobby, would it be odd that they're stressing this vehicle so much and these are not the possible suspects, that they're just people that they want to talk to, or is that perfectly normal in your world?
No, I think it's normal. I mean, look, they've made it pretty clear that the occupants of that vehicle might have, vital information for them. So they've actually given some pretty specific information, like the occupants might have specific, it's very specific to the occupants of that vehicle. So they know something, obviously, about that vehicle and about where the vehicle was at a certain point in time and other things. So, and I think they're basically saying, if you read between the lines, that the occupants of this vehicle may not even know they have such valuable information as Chris just described. They just may say, oh, I didn't even know that was important. And you don't know what the investigators know. So that's why it's better just to call in, tell them everything, and let the investigators sort it out, what's important, what's not important. People think they have to see somebody shoot somebody, or they have to see a crime. but this is all a big puzzle, and the piece that you might add may have nothing to do with seeing a crime or seeing a victim, but it may be a crucial piece to see the overall puzzle. So I think it's quite, it could be a suspect, it could not be a suspect, but they've made it clear that the occupants of that vehicle could have, and they feel, I think, must have vital information, or they wouldn't be making such a public appeal for people to look for this car. In other words, you also run afoul of that, like, people should not be, trying to pull this car over or trying to trap this car, trying to approach this car. If they see it, just call the detectives and tell them where and when you saw that vehicle.
And speaking of pulling this car over, Detective Sergeant Anderson, is it odd that in 2022, with cameras seemingly everywhere, they put this bolo out, be on the lookout last week? It's been probably close to a week and no sighting of this car. Is that odd to you?
No, it's nothing is really odd at this point in the investigation. I know, lots of people want to say that, hey, it's been a month, it's been a long period of time, and this case is still not closed. But this is actually the pivotal point of the investigation, actually 4 weeks in. It's not the end, it's not the beginning, it's a pivotal point, because after 4 weeks, you start that's when some of the information, some of the forensic evidence, which is what's going to solve this case, some of that forensics evidence is coming back to these investigators, and they start to vet that information out, just like this vehicle. So, one very smart thing I wish we had when I was investigating homicides is they have a dedicated website where witnesses or people can upload video around that area, and then they'll have analysts to look into it. God, I wish we had that type of technology. When I was investigating homicide cases, you can imagine how much information can be gathered just by having a website where citizens can upload their own personal video into this site where an analyst can look into it. So no, I don't think that's strange or odd at any point.
And the show that you were profiled on, which got a lot of people hooked on true crime, is 48 Hours, following crime scene investigators. How much truth is there to the title that the first 48 hours are critical? Because we are well beyond that now, right, Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're way beyond it. But what I believe people kind of misconstrued that title, or at least they did when I was investigating cases. They felt like if you didn't have it solved within the first 48 hours, it won't be solved. That's not the case. What it says, you're looking for that critical lead within those first 48, and it makes it much harder. So in a case like this, where you will have a fair amount of forensics evidence, you're still working to gather that evidence. You're not operating within the first 48 hours, but you're moving like you're operating in the first 48 hours, even a month into this investigation.
And Bobby, to you, so we talked about public safety off the top, and that would really be the only kind of marker for you in terms of disseminating information. But during this virtual press release today, the captain of the Moscow Police Department said that there was no indication of a specific relevant risk to the community, but then on the flip side, urged people to stay vigilant, walk on lit paths, be aware of their surroundings, and let people know when they expect to be home and when they've arrived. Now, we interviewed a professor from the University of Idaho just this past weekend, and he says people are pretty freaked out. He's sleeping with a firearm next to his bed. So what do you make of that? I mean, because it sounds like police aren't 100% confident. Should they, at least as it relates to public safety, should they be releasing any more info? And should people, in your opinion, feel safe by what they put out here?
Well, I don't think they have any more information that would help the public be any safer. Because they haven't named a suspect. If they had one, they would, obviously name him and publicize him so people would look for him and stuff. So I don't think they have anything. And you hit on, he used very specific language when he said, we don't have anything specific that indicates the public at large is a danger. However, we want everyone to be vigilant. So that tells me, of course, you've got some homicidal maniac who killed 4 kids on the loose. So that's, in general, a danger, but they don't have anything specific to say that he's going to do it again, or he wasn't after any of these individuals. Very early on in this case, they did say something as it looked like it was a targeted event, and they walked that back a little bit. Generally, a crime like this does look like it's somebody that was going after one of these victims, because to randomly walk into a house and kill 4 people like this is very odd. If it's random, it's not odd if one of or more of those people were specific victims. The person who killed them knew them. So they are admitting that, you should be vigilant because we've got somebody that killed 4 people in a very brutal manner who may be still living in this community. So I think that they have to tell you that, be vigilant, stay alert. But then they have nothing specific to say, because they don't, just not part of this crime scene. They have nothing specific that tells them that the public at large is in danger.
Sounds like CYB, cover your behind a little bit. And, if I'm a student in Moscow, Idaho, or a professor, I'm definitely going to be extra vigilant and probably a little extra nervous. Back to you, Bobby, since you're the federal agent. The captain said that they're sifting through, and this is also to Chris's point, they're sifting through a massive volume of information, partly uploaded by eyewitnesses in the case. They have teams in Moscow, Salt Lake City, Utah, and in Virginia. From a FBI standpoint, why is that significant, those particular areas?
Well, the FBI field office that covers Idaho is in Salt Lake City. So there's no field office in Idaho, right? So Salt Lake City is the headquarters. That's where the manpower, most of the manpower in that region for the FBI is housed. In Virginia, of course, we have our ident division. We have our laboratory division. We have a lot of the headquarters divisions that are not in DC are farmed out into Virginia. So a lot of the manpower that the FBI is dedicating to this case in answering phones and taking leads and answering the 800 numbers are, remotely. They don't have to be obviously in Moscow. They can be anywhere when someone dials that 800 number. So I think that the significance of that is Salt Lake City because geographically, and then Virginia because that's where we have our laboratory division, our identification division. That's where all the fingerprints in the country go to. NCIC is based in Virginia and stuff. So I think that those are why Salt Lake City and Virginia are relevant to the FBI's participation.
And then, Chris, just lastly, with this information in this virtual press release, the captain of the Moscow Police Department said that he stressed the importance of a thorough investigation, but said that the goal is not just an arrest, but ultimately a conviction. So through your eyes, through the lens of a detective sergeant, how important is it to get it right, not just to solve the case, but to make sure you're getting a conviction? And how is that delineated?
It's everything in a criminal investigation such as this. I mean, look, there are going to be mistakes that are made during every investigation. There's been no perfect investigation ever in the history of criminal investigations. But the thing that needs to happen is these investigators have to take their time. They have to vet every piece of information and be able to tell what's information that is a part of this case and what's not. That's incredibly important because you won't find out how important it is until you get to the end of the investigation. When the person has been arrested, they are in trial and that case is being prosecuted. Cases are won and lost at the crime scene and during the investigation. Those are the two most pivotal points. So if any mistakes that are made or any astute criminal defense attorney is going to bring up mistakes that are made, you have to, as an investigator, you have to be able to delineate or push through any information that's not good in any criminal investigation that's been done.
And Bobby, to you, can you just kind of walk the audience through what is going on from an investigative standpoint? You've got these different jurisdictions. You've got Moscow, but then you've got state, and you've got the feds, which is what you were a part of. So when they get up every day, is there a big meeting, a conference call with the FBI and the Moscow PD? Just break down a little bit how this all plays out in reality, in real time, as they're investigating this case between the different jurisdictions.
Sure. So I think they're all working together. I think you probably have dozens, if not more than dozens, of people doing things. And I think there may be what we call shift briefings. Each shift briefs the next shift, and then you have one overall meeting with the representative. So in other words, there are teams. So there's a forensic team, there's a witness team, there's a surveillance team. There's all these teams that are broken up, focusing on different aspects of the investigation. Each one of those teams will have a representative to kind of, hey, what's the latest on this, or what's the latest on that? And then, overall, there'll be a lead investigator at the top, a detective that's kind of putting it all together. But there's so much to do in these cases that they usually break it up into teams. So even within the forensic team, there may be sub teams broken up. Somebody's doing DNA, somebody's doing wound analysis on the weapon. So people are doing different things. So there are different teams, and then everybody's reporting in, per shift, the results of the lead. Somebody's just doing 800 numbers, new leads that come in. Somebody's probably doing that white Elantra. There's probably a team just on the white Elantra. So you have teams that are doing all of these different things, and then everything's kind of being coordinated up and up and up the ladder.
Really interesting. We used to have production meetings at the beginning and end of every day, post-mortem and news. It's an unfortunate word for this kind of subject, but we would have a post-mortem after a newscast. So I just think it's always interesting to hear how this stuff is organized, because there's so much information coming in from so many different directions. And, you got one team working on the car, one team working on the wounds, and you just want to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. I try to do that with my homework ahead of the show. We have Tracy Walder on tomorrow night. She's a criminal profiler, a former criminal profiler, and she tweeted this out today, caught my attention. She says, I actually think it's highly possible that he, meaning the killer, has integrated himself back into the community, said former FBI Special Agent Tracy Walder. I'm going to say he, because my gut tells me that it is a male. What this person tells me is that, yes, he is very much a cold-hearted killer. The obvious thing that struck me here, Chris, is there a chance that the killer is amongst everyone in Moscow right now?
Oh, yeah, that's very possible to put it. Some of the biggest investigations that I've had, and I'm sure Bobby will agree with this. These folks are not going out and leaving the country and moving to different areas and assuming new identities and things of that nature. No, they're usually hiding in plain sight. And I think what the investigator that you read the tweet about, I think what she's referring to when she says he is just statistically, this is probably a male that's responsible for these murders. And that's the reason why she's using the term he. But I can guarantee you, investigators, they should not get tunnel vision during this investigation and eliminating women, unless forensically they've already been able to eliminate that it was a woman involved in this case.
And Chris, is it your assertion that it is one killer and not more than one killer at this point, from what you know?
So I think it is very possible that one person is responsible, just because of the small amount of information that the law enforcement agency has released about it. I think that it's very possible that it's just one particular person, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were multiple people involved. These are, from what I've read, from what I've researched as far as the crime scene goes, it's very possible that one person could have been responsible for all four of these murders. Very possible. But look, I'm an investigator that always keeps every door open until the evidence closes that door. So I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if it were multiple people that were involved.
And it's fascinating to hear you guys talk till the evidence closes the door.
Absolutely.
So everyone out there has got to hear that. Bobby, to you, I want to give you a shot. Is the killer possibly still in Moscow right now?
Yeah, possibly. I was asked about Tracy's comments last night on a different show, and Tracy was in the LA office of the FBI where I retired out of, and I'm not sure what she's basing that on. It's possible. It's also possible they're not there. Remember, we just covered the case for the last 5 years in Delphi, Indiana. Those two little girls that were killed off of that railroad bridge that guy that they arrested 5 years later was living in Delphi, which is a smaller town than Moscow. And so Delphi, Indiana had the killer was there the entire time. It took him 5 years, but guess what? Justice is going to be served because he's going to either plead guilty or he's going to be arrested because they were very careful. They took their time. It doesn't serve anyone to speed up and make mistakes because of speed. I was a member of a forensic team towards the end of my career, and I always said two things: you can be thorough or you can be fast, but you can't be both. So you have to slow down. If you want to be thorough, you have to take your time. You can't yield to public pressure on wanting I laugh when I see people saying, "Oh my God, it's been a month and we're not." A month is short an investigation. Remember, I'm a Fed, right? So the old phrase, don't make a federal case out of something. We used to take our time. My investigations lasted for years sometimes. And so, we're used to a very slow, methodical pace. And the only objective is to make sure you do it right. And as Chris said earlier, if you make mistakes early in the investigation because you're trying to do things quickly, that mistake can haunt you all the way down the line. And some defense attorney is going to make hay out of that. We've all heard defense attorneys say, what's the one thing there? Oh, you focused in too quickly on my client. You didn't look at anything else, right? They all come out with that. So you have to be wary of that. You have to look at all of the leads, all of the possible suspects. And by the way, like when food truck guy was ruled out, when they said that's not legally binding on the prosecution. They're saying that now, and that could be. And I would urge people, leave that guy alone. Don't go looking for him. Whatever. The police know who he is. They've already talked to him. If he winds up coming back into the investigation, the police will handle it. But we don't want another Richard Jewell on our hands. We don't want somebody being assumed guilty just because he's on some videotape at a food truck. If the police say he's been cleared, he's been cleared. But that's not legally binding on the police. That doesn't mean that guy can't be, come back into the investigation later. So people have to understand that this is a process. It doesn't happen fast all the time, but it has to be thorough. And I'd rather be thorough than fast. And again, this drumbeat of we need answers and we need information doesn't serve the ultimate goal of finding the perpetrator in a way that's going to secure a conviction or a guilty plea.
And I'm a huge fight fan. And in the fight game, there's an expression, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And it's kind of like that with investigations. I think you've got to take your time and, again, make sure that you're covering all your bases. And you bring up a good point too, Bobby. I mean, we hear this term, so-and-so has been cleared, but that is not legally binding. Anyone that's been cleared can be brought right back in and is no longer cleared, correct?
That's right. That's right. The double jeopardy doesn't attach until you have actually what they call face legal liability. And that usually means you've been charged or you've been at a point in the legal process where you can be, convicted. And so it doesn't attach, double jeopardy does not attach until you're part of the legal process and you're charged or, you're at trial, things like that. So any of this is simply preliminary. Now, of course, if that guy works his way back into the case, will his defense attorney say, bring up the fact that he was cleared initially? Sure. But the prosecutors will deal with that as they have to.
Bobby, spoken like a true attorney. So here's an interesting character in all this. And I'm raising this because he's back in the news today. And he made a little news on our podcast last week. We had Jonathan Gillum on last week, who's a Navy SEAL and a former FBI special agent. And he says everyone needs to be ruled out. And he sort of suggested that about one of the parents in this case, and that is Steve Goncalves. Now, Steve Goncalves, of all the parents, has been speaking a lot. And he was back talking to Fox News. And he said this. I'd like to get your take on what he's saying here. The father of slain University of Idaho student Kaylee Goncalves, Stephen Goncalves, told Fox News Digital that the victims had, quote unquote, big open gouges that were clearly the work of a, quote, sadistic male, and called police, quote, cowards for not sharing more with the public. What goes through your head? What's your initial reaction to this, Chris? I think Chris may have froze up on us. So Bobby, I'll let you pick that one up.
Look, it's a grieving father, so I don't want to get into too much of the details with what he says. He's obviously frustrated. he's grieving. But again, as I said earlier in the podcast, I never saw my role as working for the families. To the extent that taxpayers pay my salary, sure, but I did not let the families influence my investigation, because sometimes the perpetrators came from within the family. So you have to be very careful how you deal with a family. I don't think his comments serve the investigation well. So if he's really truly interested in the investigation going forward in a way that it should, in the way that's most effective, he wouldn't be making comments like that. I think he's being misguided in some of those comments, calling them cowards because they're not releasing information. I mean, like I said, I would never release information, only those two factors, if it served a public safety function or if it was strategically beneficial to my investigation. Other than that, I'm not releasing anything to anybody. That's not my role. My role is to get a conviction of the perpetrator, and everything else is secondary to that.
And how would you deal with the pressures put upon you by families? You just kept a distance, or how would you do
Luckily for me, within the FBI, they had a program called the Victim Witness Assistance Program, and we had coordinators that were actually trained, and they were psychology people and like that. They would actually be our interface with the families. If the family member was a witness, of course, we would directly interview them and stuff. And we always spoke to the families initially. But as the investigation went on, I didn't want to be the one to update the families. We had people that were liaisons that could basically be on the phone with the family all day long. I didn't have the time, but they could, and then they would be the intermediary between me and the family, those victim witness assistance people. And they're better trained in helping the family navigate what, there are state programs that sometimes are available for family members that come in from out of town. They could get reimbursed for hotels. There's all kinds of things that happen that different states have to avail the family of. And those people were very well versed in those things. I wasn't. So I had to focus on the investigation. And thankfully within the FBI, we had people that could be those intermediaries and keep the family updated to the extent that we wanted them to know. And then they would be the ones to deal with the family.
And we've got the detective sergeant back just in time. So Steve Goncalves went on in this Fox News digital story to say that he asked the coroner, whose name is Kathy Maba, how many times the victims were stabbed. And he says, and these are quotes, she says, "Sir, I don't think stabs is the right word. It was like tears, like this was a strong weapon, not like a stab," he told Fox News Digital Sunday. He goes on, he says, "She said these were big open gouges. She said it was quick. These weren't something where you're going to be able to call 911. They were not going to slowly bleed out," he said. Chris, should the father have this information? Should the coroner, if she did give this up? I mean, ethically speaking, and from an investigative standpoint, this should not be happening, right?
The coroner they are their own investigating agency. I don't know. I know how we worked and when I was here investigating cases, and the coroners usually would not release any information to the family, especially information such as that. Now, what that actually does is it hurts the investigation tremendously that information is even being put out, because who's the only other person that would know what these injuries looks like outside of the investigators in the coroner's office? That's the person that's responsible. So it's an investigator's job to talk whenever, if he gets a suspect in and he begins to confess to that crime, he's going to know exactly where the injuries were and how they look. So it incredibly damages the investigation when that information is put out in the public, because now what you've all done is you've given the suspect information that, okay, they know this, so I just need to say this. He'll be formulating answers or ways that he can, if there is some evidence that's found on the scene, how can he escape from being arrested and avoid from being arrested? So, you shouldn't put information out like that. And I understand, he's coming from an emotional place. I really do understand it, but he's only hurting the investigation and keeping the suspect abreast of what's happening with this criminal investigation.
So Jennifer Koffendorfer is also a former FBI special agent who's coming on our show this week. I believe she was out of Houston. She tweeted out in regards to all this, most notable, and this is exactly what you guys just said, most notable, by releasing details, the investigation becomes compromised. How can legitimate interviews be conducted when it's unknown if their information is derived from the media or from what they actually saw or did? It can't. I mean, Bobby, I'm not suggesting in any way this guy is the killer or remotely close, but from an investigative standpoint, is it true that you need to rule out everyone, including family members?
Well, not everyone. Look, when I went to homicide school, when I worked in the late 80s and early 90s, so many homicides, RICO homicides with the mafia and gangs in New York City, that NYPD, my partner, sponsored me, and I went to the NYPD homicide school. And what you do, one of the first basic things is it's a Venn diagram, right? You have two circles. You have a circle that has all the people that are in the victim's life. And then you have a circle that has where the homicide took place, and all the people that are associated with that location. You lay them over each other, and where they intersect, you might have a pool of suspects there. And so there's a lot of people in this particular case in those overlapping circles, and certainly any family members. But you don't have to work too hard to work family members, especially here or college. Some of these kids came from out of the area. Their families lived somewhere else. It's not hard to have an alibi to say the guy was with his wife on the night of the murders. It's kind of sometimes an uncomfortable situation to have, because they know why you're asking these questions. Well, where were you on the night? When's the last time you spoke to your daughter? It sometimes can be uncomfortable, but it oftentimes can pretty quickly, be ruled out. I mean, the real danger is, as Chris said, first of all, we get false confessions all the time. And so somebody could come in here and confess to these murders. Now they know what the wounds look like because the father is saying what the coroner said. Now you can have a false confession. And now that takes a lot of time to weed out. Also, that coroner is going to be a witness at the trial. Any previous statements that coroner has made relating to what they're going to testify about at trial, which is the wounds, can come in. Now, it's the father's statement, so it's hearsay. But a defense attorney can bring that up and say, did you tell the father this? So, that could be either impeachable material, or could just make it messy at trial when that coroner is on the stand testifying about those wounds.
And I don't want to harp on this too much, but this unfortunately becomes news because he did speak out and he's so close to the quadruple homicide. But he went on to say that the knife slashed open. This is a little gruesome for those who don't want to hear. Here's your 3-second warning. He says that the knife, this is Stephen Goncalves, slashed open Kaylee Goncalves' liver and lungs. He said he paid for a copy of his daughter's death certificate, which included some of the details of her injuries, but he doesn't know whether his daughter or Maddie Mogan were the targets, and then went on to say he has his own suspicions. I'm completely ignorant to this, Chris, but would a copy of the death certificate reveal all this, and would it be made public so soon with this ongoing investigation?
It shouldn't be. When I was investigating cases, they wouldn't release any of that information out this early in a case, especially with it being a wide open investigation. We would have to sign off giving permission to release that information out. So yeah, I know there are some cities that are some offices, coroner's offices, that will have a small narrative about some of the injuries in that certificate that the family has. But I'm sure he can't have a full copy of the autopsy report, because that would be way too much information to release. But maybe in that death certificate, there is a little space that they usually release it. Now, when I was working, we didn't have that.
And then, Bobby, to you, he goes on here, and this is a direct quote. I got outraged by them, meaning the police, not just coming out, and investigators, not just police, but also, I assume, the FBI and other agencies. So he says, I got outraged by them, not just coming out and saying this was a woman or a man, because they should know by the amount of strength it took to deliver the injuries. They're just being cowards. There are girls walking around the street right now that deserve to know. They should be looking out for a sadistic male. Again, it's odd behavior. He's saying things that, investigators should probably be saying, and not him. But I mean, does this just strike you as like a forlorn parent who's beside himself at this moment?
Yeah, and he would behoove the investigation to not make so many statements, because quite frankly, in those statements, he's absolutely flat out wrong. He's wrong. This does not have to be a sadistic murder, a monster. You got everybody looking for some monster on the street. What purpose does that serve? First of all, this killer could, once he's in custody, he may look very ordinary. So, of course, we all know that this was a brutal crime scene. So someone out there is a brutal murderer, but that doesn't mean he's walking around with horns and a tail, down Main Street in Moscow. So he, what does he want the police to say? First of all. Second of all, the male-female thing. Sure, they probably feel it's probably a male, like Chris and I do, like a lot of us do, simply because the physicality to carry out this type of crime is probably a male. You have to be strong. Now, I will say this. If you told me one of the victims had a wound pattern around the face that the others didn't, I would say that that's more indicative of a woman. A woman killer that's killing another woman usually attacks the face. And that's just statistically, we know that. If you don't have that, you have just bodily wounds that cause the death, then it's probably a male, simply because, to me, the physicality that's required. Now, I say that, and like Chris said earlier, we could be wrong. I could be wrong. It could be a female. So the police can't come out and say it's a male. They can't. It's a ridiculous assertion to think that the police can come out and say, hey, be careful, there's a male, monster out there. What purpose does that serve? Because again, he's not going to look like a monster. That's the problem, in the child sex crimes things we used to have when, predators. I know people that don't even like to call them predators, because predators are lions and tigers and big imposing things. And a lot of times the perpetrators in those child sex crimes don't look like a monster. They don't look like a lion or a tiger. They look like a meek little mild person, and then they're molesting children. So you can't apply those kind of dramatic labels unless you know who it is. And so it doesn't serve any purpose for the police to come out there in Moscow and say, be careful, girls, there's some murderous monster working around. I mean, everybody kind of knows that, right? And that, plus the fact that we don't know what he looks like or she looks like. We're like, I do have the opinion that it's a male, but I could be wrong. And until we have the person named as a person of interest or a suspect or somebody under arrest, it's irresponsible to be talking in those terms.
And to Bobby's point, Detective Sergeant, he says this could just be an ordinary looking person. You expect the killer to look like a monster, right? But it could look like the kid right around the block or the adult right around the block. To that, if you had to guess, would you say that this is a rage killing or a premeditated serial killing? What's your take so far? Do you have one?
There's not nearly enough evidence for me to say or even suggest whether or not this was a rage or some sort of sadistic psychopath that just picked these 4 girls and young man to murder. I'm sorry, these 3 young ladies and man to murder. It's not enough information out there. So I'm hesitant to say, because I don't want to push this investigation any further than what it needs to be. I mean, I want the public to know. I'm interested in knowing, because look, I'm a chief of police at a college. I've sent my kids off to college. I know what these parents are going through. You send your kids off to college so that they'll get an education. You don't expect them to become vicious victims or victims of a vicious murder. So look, I'm just as emotionally invested as anyone else is. But for me to say whether I might give my take or just, I don't want to say what this person was. I know that this person is vicious. This person, I don't know if this was a targeted attack. Some of the evidence would suggest that it may not have been a targeted attack. But then there's a lot of other evidence that suggests that it was. It's just not enough information for me to make that determination, even with all the homicides that I've worked.
And Bobby, just back to a comment you made. You said if the injuries were to the face, more likely a woman. What is the thought process behind that? Are those more personal injuries? Women are more personal when they attack. What is it that illustrates that? Yeah,
this comes from our FBI profiling unit that I talked to about this case and other cases in the past. And so women face is beauty, and usually a woman to woman crime has to do with beauty. Either she's prettier than I, and that's why my husband slept with her, whatever it is. it's a beauty thing, and I'm going to take that beauty away from this person by attacking their face. And that's basically on a very basic psychological, I'm not a psychologist, but on a very basic level, that's what the profilers tell me, that it's a beauty thing. It's she's prettier than me or whatever, and I'm going to end that, and she's never going to be prettier than me again. And that, that's why she did whatever happened that aggrieved me. And the reason why I'm attacking her is because there's a beauty thing. And that's kind of my basic understanding. It's probably more nuanced than that. A profiler will be able to tell you that. But that's what the profilers that I've worked with have told me.
And we had one of the original mind hunters on, Ann Burgess, who's 86 years old. She's a legend in studying all this. And she had some interesting things to say about it in our episode. But Chris, I know you don't want to speculate, and I can tell you're very serious about what you do, which is why you get the respect that you do. But is this something that a college kid could have pulled off? I mean, this seems like, from all accounts, it was something that may have been pre-planned, took tremendous strength. Is it something a quote unquote dopey college kid could have pulled off?
I wouldn't call the person responsible for a crime like this dopey in any way, shape, or form. I would say that, yes, it's very possible that this could be a college student or a person that is around college age to be responsible for. I don't think that this person is in the least bit unintelligent, but there's a lot to still be sifted through. There's a lot of information that's coming at these investigators. And Bobby mentioned something earlier about how these investigations are done, and the amount of information that comes into these cases is just amazing. It can be overwhelming at times if you're not used to working cases such as this. I've had multiple cases where we've had to call in FBI investigators, and we've had the entire alphabet crew. I say that about the U.S. Marshals, the ATF, FBI. We've had them all working on certain cases, and the amount of information can be it can be enormous for one investigator to handle. That's why there are so many sub-investigations that are happening in a case such as this. So no, I wouldn't say that this person is some dopey person at all. But I do believe that this could be a college age person that's responsible for this crime.
And to your point about the complexity of the investigations, I know last week when the Moscow PD released information about this 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra, they got so many tips all of a sudden that they had to basically farm it out to the FBI. They could no longer handle the amount of tips. So that's interesting. If you guys would indulge me, the viewers are what makes our show. So we'll take some viewer comments and then we'll wrap it up. The first one comes from Judy Jackson. She writes, I'm not surprised that the case is taking this long. There are several victims, so many tips, so many backgrounds that must be checked, so many people who could be involved. And I've heard that sometimes it takes a month or more to get forensic tests back. This is exactly the kind of case that usually takes a long time. Sometimes eventually the killer talks or brags. Bobby, does Judy raise good points, and does she miss anything?
Sorry about that.
That's the killer attack dog. Do you want to take that one, Chris?
I will.
He's taming the dog.
Yeah, no, right. Judy, she brings up a lot of great points. These cases like this, they do take time. Because sifting through all of the information that's coming at these investigators, it takes a lot of time. And look, any investigation should be taken on and investigated with the end result in mind. That's meaning that you should be thinking about the prosecution and how this case is going to look to a jury. So without parsing through each or as much of that information as possible, you better believe once it goes to court, when this person is arrested and it goes to court, some defense attorney is going to take it's not what you did that they're going to be looking at, the defense that is. They're going to be looking at what you didn't do. So if you don't parse out or look through or vet the information that you get in these cases, you better believe that defense attorney is going to bring up every piece of information that you did in the investigation, that you didn't eliminate as being a potential key piece of evidence.
So Chris brings up
she brings up a great point.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at this as just wanting the case to be solved. Chris and Bobby look at this in terms of prosecution, and that's a whole different ball game. Next comment is from something, I have no idea what this is. Realm is the last word. So Bobby, to you, this comment: murders and serious crime have been happening on campuses since before camera surveillance. I find it absolutely absurd that there are no cameras in this area where kids wander from place to place with no security during the dark hours. I know the Sigma Chi house had no cameras on it. They spoke to the president. That is the fraternity house that's basically a stone's throw away from the murder scene. I believe the crime scene, that home, I believe did have a camera on it. I'm not sure, but what about the fact that there's not more surveillance in proximity to where this crime occurred?
Well, first, I think it was off campus. So I think that that's one thing. You know, the university only can control their grounds on campus. So the university has nothing to do with off campus housing, right? And believe me, I have friends who have rental units here in Los Angeles that are near campuses. And guess what? They don't spend a whole lot of money. It's a rental house. They use the cheapest materials. I used to help them in between semesters. Every time a new set of students came in and out, we'd have to go in and clean it up and put in new fixtures and stuff. It's a mess. Usually these houses are rented out for profit, so they don't have a whole lot of sophistication. In other words, you wouldn't have an alarm system or camera system like any of us would have in our own homes, because this is a rental unit. They're trying to maximize the profit. So they're not putting in the best materials. They're not putting in sophisticated types of security. I wish there was, obviously. And in my house, I have cameras on the outside and cameras on the inside and stuff. But this is a different situation. This is a rental house. It's off-campus housing. And a lot of times you don't have it. And if we look at the picture of that house, right? It's offset. It's set back from the road. This is not kind of a suburban house, a place where all the houses are right across from each other and very regular lots. It seemed to be a little bit more rural than that and stuff. And so you might not have cameras. Unlike, I'm working a project now on the Jussie Smollett case, and the investigators there, they had so much video. They literally could follow the two guys around the city of Chicago. It helped that it was the second coldest day on record in the city of Chicago. So they were the only two guys walking around at 3 a.m. But they had thousands of hours of tape that they had to look through. One detective told me he sat there and watched 12 hours of a tree growing because he had to make sure that there wasn't 1 2-second bit where they walked through. And so it takes a lot of time to review video evidence, because if you're just looking for that one frame where the person walks through and you've got 8 hours of video, it takes about twice as long. If it's 8 hours, it takes you about 16 hours to view it, because you have to keep stopping and looking and stopping and looking and stuff. So the more information that they're getting in, thankfully they're getting a lot of information, but that just means it's going to take a whole lot longer to digest a lot of that stuff. And people should be patient.
Definitely it is not as glamorous a job as it appears. My wife and I at night, we're like, oh, we should have become detectives, but it's a lot of hard work. Same thing with TV news. It's not all glamour. We talked about this guy earlier. I don't have the name of the commenter here, Chris, but this person says, white hoodie guy at the food truck was blatantly rejected, started to walk after them when they left the food truck. He quickly went another direction in haste. Did he go home where his anger builds and festers, decides he's going to find them and kill them? My hair stood up seeing his body language and actions. Bad feeling about him. We shall all stay tuned. Again, this is the guy at the food truck. His name has been out there. I'm not going to bring it up right now. He's been cleared, but there is a chance investigators are still looking at him, right, Chris?
Absolutely. You know, look, just like I said earlier in our interview, you know, no one is truly eliminated from an investigation until the evidence eliminates them. This young man, you know, look, and there again, we're at that pivotal time of an investigation. You know, I'm sure back when I started investigating cases, it would take months for us to get phone records back. You know, now you can get them back a lot sooner. So I'm sure that they are already looking into his whereabouts, seeing if he has a cell phone, seeing what information he gave them, and comparing that information to what they have forensically. So yeah, it doesn't mean just because they come out and say that, hey, we've eliminated him or he's not a suspect, doesn't mean that they've completely eliminated him from the investigation at all.
And Chris, when you're working any case, but particularly a high profile case, how tough was it for you to go home at night and go to bed and like detach yourself? I mean, I imagine you're thinking about this 24/7, or you're waking up in the middle of the night. What's it like for you?
So what most people don't understand about homicide investigations, I know all training tells you, you need to leave your work at work and you don't need to take this stuff home. But if you're an investigator like me, that kind of not necessarily takes it personal, but I live within my head. So there would be times where I would be at home and my son could be jumping up and down on my leg. My daughter would be downloading her day, and my wife is over just talking and having fun. And I'm there physically, but my mind is still at work. I'm still looking over my case file. I'm reading over, what did I not do today that I should have gotten done? So yeah, it's extremely hard to get these cases out of your head. It's extremely hard for you to just leave it at work. And most investigators can't do it. I know I couldn't. I never left my work at work. I always took it with me. I would even make copies of everything that I had done for that day, bring it home and spread it out. I have an office that's full of old homicide cases that the few cases that I didn't solve, I still have copies of some of the information that I had in those cases at home. I mean, just because that's just who I am. These cases become a part of you, and they should become a part of you if you care about people.
Bobby, same with you. You come from a New York family. I'm from New Jersey. I know your type. Same with you. Was it tough to let go when you went home and tried to go to bed?
Sure. And then that's what really bothered me when I saw the father's comments that these detectives are cowards. I mean, they are living this case. They are living it at lunch. They are living at dinner. As Chris said, the minute they put their head on the pillow at night, they're still thinking about it. You can't get away from this. I ran the FBI dive team. And after we recovered a teenage girl who was the victim of a predator, one of my divers came to me, and he had teenage daughters at home, and he took a leave of absence away from the team to go back to counterterrorism because he was that affected by this other stranger that he had no connection to, but recovering her body the way we did from underwater, he had to take a step away because it was affecting him because he had two teenage daughters. This stuff stays with it. These investigators are living this case. These are young people in the prime of their lives. Some of these detectives, I'm sure, have daughters that age or families. And of course, they are doing everything they can. You are so bought into these investigations. And I'm sure, when Chris was talking, I was hearing my own wife, at the dinner table saying, "Are you listening to me?" Because she's over there talking and my mind is on the case. And then she realizes that I haven't responded to 2 or 3 of her questions. And then you finally get "Are you listening to me?" And oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was just thinking of something else. Hopefully your family that generally tends to understand. But my father was a detective sergeant in New York City. My brother was a detective sergeant when he retired in NYPD. These are, and that's the one thing that TV I think shows accurately when they show the detectives and the police officers taking these cases home, because it's impossible to separate out. You'd have to be so cold-hearted, and you wouldn't be in this line of work if you were. That it's impossible to separate it out, and especially a case like this.
And it's a good time to thank you both for your service. The great thing about news is my wife would say, "You listen to me?" And I was like, "No." And I'd hop on a plane and I go to San Bernardino to cover a terror attack or wherever they were sending me. So I get to escape a little bit. But when I got back, I paid. A couple more comments, and I know you guys want to grab dinner and stop thinking about this, but a couple more and then we'll be done. This is from user with a ton of letters after the name. And they write, "I thought Dr. Wolf," now Dr. Wolf is a guest we just had on, who is a criminology professor from the University of Idaho in Moscow. He's an interesting guy. This person writes, "I thought Dr. Wolf put his finger on what makes this case so strange when he said it is baffling that 4 people were killed if it was just a man enraged by rejection of one of the girls. On the one hand, it looks like a rage-driven killing by some slighted or rejected guy because of the up-close manner of the murder using a knife and the killer's apparent familiarity with the home and the surroundings, yet the killer killed no less than 4 people and seems to have done so as part of the plan, not as an afterthought, given that all the victims were asleep when attacked." And it goes on and on. It says, "But that level of systematic and efficient pre-planned slaughter suggests some fantasy-driven psychosexual thrill kill of a true psychopath, not just a jilted ex. Chris is, I can tell by the shake of the head. This guy's thinks he's Detective Sergeant Chris, and he's not, right?
Well, no, I mean, you know, look, he may be onto something, or he could be way off base, because look, you still have, when you have cases like that, where this is some psycho person that's looking to kill as many victims as he can, you know, he usually does not leave victims. They don't live living witnesses in houses. He'll usually walk around the crime scene and admire his work and take his time and methodically go through and walk that premise. Had this person done that, he would have found those other two people that were inside of the house. So yeah, I don't, you know, look, and maybe he has maybe he has more insight, or maybe he has more experience in working cases like this than I do. But I mean, I only work 300 death scene cases, and, you know, so I don't know. Maybe he has a little bit more experience than I do. But you know, I think he may be a, you know,
I think he's jumping the gun. I think he's way ahead. He's way ahead of what we know. I mean, look, and what he said, one of the things he said, I don't think was generally correct, because I think that the male victim was found in the doorway of the bedroom where he was staying. So he was actually up maybe and was attacked at the doorway, probably trying to protect the girl that was in the room. I would be real interested in the sequence of death. So who was killed? Because if he was targeting one individual, once he got to her, he's out of there. Unless the male heard something and tried to intervene, and then he had to kill them to get out of there, because he was seen by them maybe. So my real interest in the sequence of the killings, who was killed first, who was killed second, if they can determine that, I think that would go a long way. I still think it's somebody that had an interest in one of the girls. Again, I could be wrong, but that's my opinion, and I would really like to see the sequence of the murders if they know them, and his movements through the house. And I'm sure the investigators know some of this stuff. They just haven't released it because they shouldn't, and we don't have to know. But I do think that calling this some pre-planned psychosexual thing is a little bit getting out ahead of his skis a little bit.
And there's an insatiable appetite. So a few more comments for this. This person, again, is user with a bunch of other letters afterwards, writes, "This is so great," meaning our show, of course. "Thanks so much, guys. I was also thinking that this person has never killed before, but has killed animals, mostly for sport. He's an incredibly sadistic person, and I'm so glad you described," this is a profiler we had on who I think suggested some of this, "and I'm so glad you described the elements of humiliation, hedonism, and degradation. He feels very entitled and perhaps feels he's totally above the law." Again, Chris, just pure speculation is, I mean, if you had to guess, would the personality type kind of fit this profile a little bit? A guy who's a hunter, who feels self-entitled, maybe?
Most profilers will say that they a person that would commit a crime like this would be someone who has killed before, and maybe not a human being. You know, it could be animals. It starts off usually small animals or things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, he may be onto a few elements of a profile there. But me being an investigator, you know, I that's not evidence to me. I'm looking for evidence that's going to get me to the end point of this investigation, and that's prosecution. So yeah, he or she may be on to something with some of those profiles, elements of a profile that he mentioned, but that's not evidence to me.
Next comment, "Where's your humanity? I hope some experts," that's you two guys, "I hope some experts will address why there might not have been any screams. I'm really tired of hearing people ask why there were no screams. He wasn't chasing them around the house with a knife like in the cartoons." Bobby, first, let me just say that there was a YouTuber whose name I will not mention, who's in a lot of hot water for putting out a fake scream for clicks, which is horrendous. And really, you know, that's a problem with misinformation on the internet right there. But we bring on only the best guests here, so that's not going to happen on our show. But any comments, theories, thoughts on why no screams were heard with 4 people?
Well, number one, we don't know that there were no screams heard. We don't know that. We haven't seen the statements of the 2 surviving people in that house. I answered this question several times this week on other shows. Why they never woke up through this whole thing? We don't know that they didn't wake up. here's what happens. They're on the ground floor of this house, right? They after a night of drinking, they're in bed. You know, I don't know the level of intoxication they were, but there's some level of intoxication there. Upstairs, they hear rumbling. Probably not an uncommon situation where their roommates come in later than them, also having been drinking all night, bump into the furniture, make a ruckus upstairs. And I lived in a house like this when I was in college. And what do? I drag the other pillow over my head and I curse them for making so much noise when they bumped in. You know, that's what they're thinking. If they didn't hear very specific things, if they just heard rumbling or somebody was wrestling around, they would think it's their boyfriend and the girl, or the two roommates came in and they were inebriated and they're bumping into furniture or they're jumping into bed, whatever. I mean, it's perfectly believable to me that those two surviving people in that house heard something, but they didn't attribute it to what was actually happening. They were in a little drink. They were drinking probably themselves. You know, like I said, it's probably a common occurrence that these kids come in at that hour of the night and bump into stuff and make a little noise. And they may have just, you know, attributed it to that and they went back to sleep. So we don't know that they didn't make any noise. We don't know what those two people heard. And so I would be careful to assume things based on the fact that they didn't wake up or they didn't hear anything. They might have heard something. They might have woken up and they just might have attributed it to other things. It depends on what they heard. Investigators know all this. We don't have to know this at this point. But I would be careful in making assumptions based on that because we don't know if that happened. We don't know if they heard anything. We don't know if they woke up.
And a final comment for you to both react to, and I have a feeling I know how you're going to react to this. This comes from my perspective, 677. Law enforcement being so tight-lipped about this case has not helped to locate the killer, in my opinion. I think it has actually allowed the killer to get away. So from a guy who's worked 300 homicide cases, Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson, your response to, does my perspective have the wrong perspective?
Yeah, I think that they have the wrong perspective. In all actuality, the more information that you release to the public only helps the defendant or the suspect in this case to elude arrest. He'll know exactly what you have. The more you talk, because you better believe that while we are all tuned to our televisions and listening to any type of media outlet, the suspect is doing the same thing, but he's doing it for a different reason. He's doing it to elude arrest. So the reason why they are keeping information close to the chest is because when they bring him in and he decides if he talks or if he doesn't talk, they'll have evidence that he will not know exactly what evidence they have against him. And that helps them in the long run.
Bobby, I've got an interesting final question, then I'll get your final thoughts. So Ann Burgess, who's this very famous FBI mind hunter, the woman I spoke about who's 86, we had her on with a person who's also he's more than a profiler. He studies serial killers with a PhD. And he flagged a very strange comment, and that's putting it nicely, a very misogynistic comment that was part of the thread on on their show, on their episode. Is it possible, and I'm not saying this about our show specifically, but is it possible if this is a serial killer that they're out there watching themselves, watching podcasts, watching the news to see themselves and comments about themselves and potentially even commenting themselves? Well, sure. And as Chris just said, I don't think it's possible. I think it's likely. I think it's highly likely. And I would caution to call this a serial killer yet. And the reason why profiling is of limited value in this particular case is because this is one crime. Profilers like to take multiple crime scenes, multiple victims, and this is one crime, basically one crime scene. It's actually a couple within one, but profilers want to see a pattern. And this is only one crime, so it's hard to build a pattern from one crime. So I'd be careful to put too much emphasis on a profile. You can't do a full, complete profile unless you have multiple crime scenes, multiple crimes, multiple victims. Your victimology gets more accurate the more victims you have and the more crimes you have. And the profile gets more accurate. This is one crime. Profilers don't like to usually take on one crime and one crime scene. We're calling it profiling, but what we're doing is just what every other investigator does, is figuring out the kind of person that did this. And that sometimes gets mixed up with a profile. It's not exactly what profilers do. I work with Jim Clemente, the famed FBI profiler, which the series Criminal Minds was based on. I work with Jim every day. You better get him on my show because I reached out to no avail.
He's a busy guy. He's got podcasts, and we're writing a show together right now. But
Nice.
you know, so I would be careful on putting too much emphasis on a profile of this killer, because there's only one incident. And if this was, you know, because you want to call him a serial killer, you're going to look for other crimes he committed. If he was interested in one of these girls, and and I'm not saying this is the case, but if this is what happened, and he got rebuffed by one of these girls, and he flew into a rage and killed all these people, you know, then you're not going to have another crime scene to compare it to. You're not going to have other crimes. So the only thing they have to work on, the investigation, is this crime and this crime scene and these victims. And that's of limited value to a real profiler. You know, who's going to like profile multiple victims in victimology. And so, because some of these people could have been collateral damage. They could have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. So victimology on them doesn't matter, because he wasn't going after them. They would just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we don't know any of that yet. And so that has to kind of come out when the perpetrator is ultimately arrested and we start learning more about the investigation and stuff. But I think that's the case right now.
And that's a very interesting distinction. And those who may have not been listening carefully, it's tough to profile with just one crime. Very important distinction. I'm going to toss it up. Not going to direct you in any way. A final thought about this case to you, Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson.
My final thoughts are, listen, the police department are going to work this case, and it won't be tried in the media. It'll be tried in the court of law. So some of the things that are being said, I believe are unfair, but it's the job we take on as investigators. So I think that we should all be patient. We should all support these families. I think the families, in my opinion, instead of hiring out private investigators to do their own separate investigation, it could be terrible to a case. I think that they should be raising money in order to put together a reward. Take that money, use it somewhere where it's going to help the investigation, because look, rewards work. They've always worked. So, you know, and look, I don't want to, I'm not being critical of these parents. I understand they are hurting. I have seen it happen too many times, but I'm telling you from my experience, hiring a private investigator is only going to hurt the investigation.
Bobby, final thought?
I concur with Chris 1,000%. And the way it's going to hurt is generating statements that could be used for witnesses at trial. When it comes to trial, if they have given even a partially contradictory statement, you know, from a statement they gave to the investigator, the detective took a statement, and then the private investigator took a statement, the defense attorney is going to wave those two statements in the witness's face and say, you told the detective this, you told the private investigator this. So the more of that kind of stuff that comes up, and the more mud that a private investigator digs into and creates impeachable material for witnesses at trial, you could cost the conviction. You could literally cost the conviction. That's the danger of a private investigator doing a parallel investigation. There's no reason for it. The police have much more power to go after evidence and to go after data and things like that than a private investigator will ever have. And so leave it to them, be patient. Like I said, the Delphi, Indiana murders, those two little girls, 5 years it took them. The guy was living in that town. There's pictures of the guy and the sketch of the suspect. He's at a bar and there's a sketch of him. And there's a picture of him 2 years ago sitting under his own sketch. So this stuff takes time, and you got to be patient. And just because it's taken this long does not mean anything. They didn't make any mistakes. They're not bumbling. This stuff takes time. This was a very complicated and complex crime scene. The evidence had to go through laboratory processes, which are probably still ongoing at laboratories. Mm-hmm. So that stuff takes time. You got commingled blood. You've got to separate all that out. DNA, mitochondrial DNA takes a while. So you have to just be patient and put your faith in these investigators. Believe me, I can tell you one thing, even though I don't know one investigator on this case, but I can tell you 100% in my mind and heart, they are working everything they can. They are putting everything they have into this. They are sleeping with it. They are waking with it. Every minute of their lives is consumed with this, and they're doing what they can to bring this person to justice.
I love the passion. You know, Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson from Reasonable Doubt on Discovery ID's channel, Investigation Discovery, also from A&E's First 48, also from his soon-to-be best-selling book, The Case. Is that right, Chris? The Case?
That's absolutely right. It's called The Case, and it has a lot to do with this case that we're talking about right now.
Awesome. And Bobby, he is a a former FBI special agent, retired, an attorney. He writes, he's written episodes of Criminal Minds. Anything else you need to plug, Bobby?
No, not right now. Not that I can talk about.
You'll come back on and plug it when you're able to.
Yes.
I apologize for the sniffles. Usually I'm yelling at Carm, the real Carm, because she's always crinkling her bags and blowing her nose on air and chewing on Ricolas. But today that was me with a cold. Thank you, guys. Please come back for the next episode of STS. Love you, America.